The wind carried a biting chill across the outskirts of Nashville as Eloise Hartwell stepped down from the wagon, her boots sinking slightly into the cold, damp earth. The Davenport estate rose before her like a relic untouched by time, its tall columns ghostly under the winter moon, its windows dim yet watchful, as though the house itself were evaluating the newcomer. Eloise wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried to ignore the way her heartbeat quickened. She had served in many Southern homes since the end of the war, but nothing about this place felt ordinary. It felt expectant. Inside, the scent of burning cedar welcomed her, mingling with something older, something buried deep within the walls. A woman in a dark dress, Mrs. Avery, the housekeeper, guided her through the grand foyer where portraits of Davenport ancestors stared down with stern, unsmiling eyes. Silas Davenport, the patriarch, had insisted on her arrival before Christmas Eve. "A house is only as ordered as those who maintain it," Mrs. Avery murmured, though the tremor in her voice betrayed that order had been slipping for some time. Eloise was led to her small quarters near the back of the house, the corridor narrow and cold. As she settled her sparse belongings, she wondered why a family so wealthy had let the mansion fall into such a state of quiet disrepair. She sensed something frayed beneath the surface, something the Davenport name alone could no longer hide. Her first glimpse of Silas came later that evening. He stood at the base of the grand staircase, tall and severe, wearing a dark coat that seemed to swallow the faint candlelight. His salt-streaked hair framed a face carved with discipline. "You'll begin before dawn," he said, his voice low but sharp. "And understand, in this house, piety is not preference, it is law." Eloise bowed her head. That law, however, felt less like devotion and more like an unspoken threat. Thomas Davenport appeared next, drifting down the stairs with a distant expression, as if he existed half in this world and half in another. Unlike his father, his features held softness, eyes shadowed but gentle, posture slightly bent as though burdened by something unsaid. He paused when he saw Eloise, offering a small nod, though Mrs. Avery quickly ushered him away. "Best not to linger," she warned. Clara Davenport arrived the following morning, returning from Nashville with a flurry of cold air and perfume. She was striking, her fiery hair tucked beneath a hat trimmed with velvet. Her gaze slid over Eloise, assessing her presence with a flicker of curiosity and something sharper, something territorial. "Father's collected another lost soul," she remarked to Thomas, though her voice carried enough edge to draw blood. Days passed, and Eloise learned the rhythms of the estate. She cleaned rooms that smelled of dust and forgotten summers, polished silver that no one used, and tended to the chapel, a small candle-lit room Silas visited each night without fail. It was during one of these evenings, while returning linens to the hall closet, that Eloise heard the first unsettling sound. A muffled cry, trembling through the chapel door. She froze. Silas's silhouette knelt at the altar, shoulders rigid, head bowed. For a moment she thought he was praying, but the choked, guttural sound was nothing like prayer. It carried the rawness of confession, or torment. The candles around him flickered as though recoiling. Eloise stepped back silently, but not silently enough. One floorboard groaned. Silas whipped his head toward the door. Eloise held her breath, pressed flat against the wall as the chapel door creaked open. She expected him to see her, to confront her, but instead he paused on the threshold, gaze searching the corridor with feverish intensity. The house seemed to hold its breath with her. Then, he shut the door again. That night, sleep eluded her. The echo of Silas's strangled cry lingered in her mind, entwined with the weight of this house and its unspoken history. She sensed that the Davenport family carried secrets heavy enough to warp the very air around them. And as the first snow of the season drifted against the window pane, Eloise realized something else. Whatever she had heard inside the chapel, it had not been meant for human ears. Yet somehow, she knew it would not be the last time she heard it. Morning crept slowly over the Davenport estate, brushing pale gold across the frost-coated fields. Eloise rose before the others, accustomed to the quiet hours that existed between night and duty. She moved silently through the kitchen, lighting the stove and preparing the first pot of coffee. though her thoughts returned again and again to the sound she had heard behind the chapel door. No house, no matter how devout, should echo with a sound like that. Thomas entered the kitchen as the steam began to rise, startled to find her already awake. His hair was disheveled, his coat half-buttoned, as though sleep had been as restless for him as it had been for her. "You're up early," he murmured, offering a faint, apologetic smile. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a cup. Eloise nodded. "There's much to be done." He hesitated before speaking again. "My father, he's strict, but he believes he's doing what's right." It sounded more like a plea than a conviction. Eloise wondered whom he was trying to convince. Mrs. Avery soon barged in, shooing Thomas away with firm authority, and set Eloise to polishing the brass fixtures that lined the hall. As Eloise worked, she heard raised voices upstairs, Clara and Silas exchanging sharp words muffled by distance. Something about Clara's tone unsettled her. It wasn't the fiery frustration of a daughter scolding her father. It was fear disguised as anger. By mid-morning, Clara descended the stairs, her face composed but eyes carrying a storm. She gestured for Eloise to follow her into the front parlor, a room perfumed by aging furniture and the faint sweetness of magnolia oil. Clara sank onto the settee with a dramatic sigh, observing Eloise over her gloved hand. "My father said you were brought here on recommendation," Clara began, her voice deceptively calm. "But I know nothing of your previous household. Where did you serve?" Eloise hesitated. The question was harmless on the surface, but Clara's eyes were hungry, as though searching for cracks. "In Franklin. Before that, Kentucky. I've worked where work was needed." Clara tilted her head, a slow smile forming. "And you've seen many families fall apart, haven't you?" The question pricked like a needle. Eloise sensed it wasn't curiosity. It was accusation wrapped in silk. Before Eloise could respond, a shrill clatter erupted from the corridor. Mrs. Avery called out for Thomas, her voice strained. Clara rose at once, annoyance turning to alarm. Eloise followed them both to the back of the house, where the stable boy was struggling to lift Thomas from the floor. He was pale, breath shallow, his shirt streaked with dust and bits of hay. "What happened?" Clara demanded. He fainted," the boy stammered. "Said he just needed air. Next thing I knew..." Silas appeared behind them, silent as a shadow. His gaze swept over his son with cold efficiency. "Get him to his room," he ordered. His voice carried no concern, only control. Eloise helped guide Thomas upstairs, feeling his weight sag against her. His pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. He whispered something so softly she almost missed it. "It's the barn," he muttered. I can't go in there, not anymore." But Mrs. Avery silenced him with a stern warning look, ushering Eloise away before she could ask more. Later, while carrying linens past Clara's room, Eloise overheard her speaking in hushed tones to someone, perhaps herself, perhaps the spirit of her mother, whose portrait hung just inside. "He's unraveling," Clara whispered, "just like before. And Father pretends it's faith." Eloise stepped back, uncertain if she should continue down the hall, when the door abruptly opened. Clara stood there, her expression a mask of composure that didn't quite hide the turmoil beneath. "Eavesdropping is unladylike," Clara said softly. I know what you heard," Clara cut in, but then her expression softened in a way Eloise hadn't expected. "This house, it does things. It remembers things." She shivered. "Just stay out of the barn. And avoid the chapel after dark." Eloise felt a cold ripple down her spine. Clara leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Not everything that prays is holy." Before Eloise could ask what she meant, Clara stepped back into her room and closed the door with a soft but decisive click. As Eloise returned to her quarters that evening, passing once more by the chapel, where a thin sliver of light glowed beneath the door, she paused, listening. No voices, no crying, just the faintest sound of breathing. Steady, patient, waiting. Snow thickened over the next 2 days, settling in quiet layers across the Davenport lands. The cold seeped into the house through the older windows, threading itself through the hallways like an unwelcome guest. Eloise tried to keep her focus on her duties, yet every movement, every glance exchanged between members of the family hinted at fractures widening beneath the surface. Thomas rarely left his room after the incident in the barn. Eloise was occasionally sent to deliver his meals, and each time she found him hunched near the window, staring out across the frozen fields as though trying to decipher a language written in frost. His hands shook, his eyes dimmed with something deeper than fear, something close to remembrance. "You shouldn't worry," he murmured once without turning. "The barn, it's just a place. What happened there was years ago." Eloise didn't press him, but the way his voice cracked told her that the barn held a story still clawing its way back into the present. Clara, by contrast, moved through the house with a feverish energy, pacing from room to room, rifling through drawers and closets that had been untouched for years. It was on one of these afternoons that Eloise, carrying linens up the second-floor staircase, spotted Clara slipping into the locked room at the end of the hall, the room that had belonged to Mrs. Davenport before her death. Curiosity tugged at Eloise's steps. She reached the doorway just as Clara emerged, her face drawn, her gloved hands clutched tightly around a small, leather-bound journal. Clara froze when she saw Eloise, color draining from her cheeks. "You didn't see anything," Clara whispered sharply. But her eyes betrayed panic and something almost fragile. Before Eloise could answer, Clara brushed past her, vanishing down the corridor like a flame snuffed out too quickly. Later that evening, Eloise cleaned the hearth in the parlor while Silas knelt in the far corner, sorting through stacks of religious pamphlets and handwritten sermons. His intensity filled the room, prickling the air. As he reached for a candle, his sleeve slipped, revealing faint scars on his wrist. Thin, white, deliberate lines. Eloise glanced away immediately, but he noticed. "Pain," he said coldly, "is a reminder of devotion. The flesh remembers what the soul must not forget." Eloise nodded, though her stomach tightened with unease. Silas's faith was not the faith she had known. His faith carried the weight of punishment, shaped by a darkness he refused to confess aloud. That night, a storm swept in from the hills. Wind battered the windows and moaned through the chimneys like a living thing. Eloise could not sleep. The walls themselves seemed restless. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the hallway, guided only by the dim glow of lanterns. It was then that she heard it. Soft, trembling, unmistakable. A voice. Not Silas's, not Thomas's. A woman's voice. It came from the locked room at the end of the hall. Eloise approached slowly, her breath catching. The house had been still for hours, every member of the family asleep or pretending to be. Yet the voice whispered through the doorframe with an urgency that felt entirely alive. Not forgiven. Never forgiven. Eloise's hand hovered inches from the doorknob. She dared not touch it. The whispering grew faint as though retreating deeper into the room's shadows. Then a sharp sound. A thud, like something falling. Eloise stepped back, heart pounding. A door creaked open behind her. She turned, startled, to find Mrs. Avery holding a lantern. The housekeeper's face was pale, her voice barely steady. "What are you doing out of your quarters at this hour?" "I heard something," Eloise whispered. "From that room." Mrs. Avery's expression hardened instantly. "You mustn't concern yourself with rooms that are not yours to clean. Go back, now." Eloise obeyed, but as she started down the hall, she glanced back. Mrs. Avery stood rigidly before the locked door, lantern trembling in her grip. She whispered something under her breath. A prayer, perhaps, but one marked by fear rather than faith. The next morning, Eloise entered the kitchen to find Clara quietly burning pages in the stove. The flames devoured them hungrily, curling the edges into black ash. As Eloise approached, Clara looked up startled, then pressed the remaining pages deeper into the fire. "You shouldn't be up so early," Clara said, forcing calm. But her eyes shimmered with the glint of someone who had uncovered too much. Eloise tried to speak, to ask what Clara had found in her mother's room, but the words stalled. Clara shook her head slowly, almost imperceptibly. "There are things in this house," Clara whispered, "that Father would rather die than have us know." Her voice cracked. And things he would kill to keep buried. Before Eloise could respond, something clattered loudly outside. The sharp, metallic slam of the barn door against the wind. Thomas's voice echoed faintly from upstairs, tremulous and urgent. No, not again. And for the first time, Eloise felt that something inside the Davenport estate was beginning to awaken. Something that had waited years for a witness. Dawn broke with a heavy stillness as though the storm had stripped the land of breath. A thin mist clung to the frozen yard, making the Davenport estate appear suspended between waking and memory. Eloise stepped outside to gather firewood, her boots crunching against the crusted snow when she noticed the barn door swaying gently. The iron latch hung crooked, as if forced open in the night. Her pulse quickened. The barn, Thomas had said, was a place he could no longer enter. A place tied to a past that everyone in the house tiptoed around. Eloise approached cautiously, placing her hand against the wooden frame. The air seeping from within was colder than the winter outside, touched by a stillness that felt wrong. Inside, the barn lay dimly lit by the broken sunlight filtering through slats in the walls. Dust motes drifted in slow spirals, the scent of hay mixed with something metallic, faint, faded but unmistakably present. Eloise scanned the stalls, her eyes adjusting to the shadows. Nothing moved. Then she saw it. A small wooden cross hung crookedly on one of the beams, its surface stained with something dark and old. The edges were worn smooth, as though grasped by desperate hands long ago. Beneath it, a patch of the floorboards appeared newer, replaced recently enough to still show the lines of the carpenter's tools. Eloise crouched, running her fingers along the fresh boards. Footsteps sounded behind her. She shot to her feet just as Thomas appeared in the doorway, breathless, his face pale with dread. "You shouldn't be in here," he whispered, gripping the doorframe. No one should." Eloise stepped toward him gently. "Thomas, what happened here?" He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "Before the war, before everything changed. Mother, she spent her final days in this barn." His eyes closed, as though the memory scorched. "Father said it was pneumonia. Said she wanted to be near the horses, but he locked the doors. He wouldn't let anyone in, not even Clara." Eloise's breath caught. "Why?" Thomas shook his head, as though the answer was too tangled to speak aloud. "After she died, he had the floor replaced. Father said it was for sanitation, but I was the one who found her. I remember the smell, the blood." His voice faltered. "Pneumonia doesn't do that." The barn seemed to tighten around them, its rafters creaking with a cold, mournful sound. Before Eloise could ask more, Silas's sharp voice erupted from the house, calling Thomas with the authority of a judge summoning a reluctant witness. Thomas flinched, then backed away. "Please leave this place alone," he whispered. "If Father thinks you're asking questions—" He didn't finish. He simply turned and hurried across the yard, shoulders hunched as though bracing against unseen blows. Eloise stepped out after him, the barn door groaning shut behind her. Inside the house, tension simmered like a covered pot left too long on the stove. Silas stalked the hallways with a feverish intensity, his Bible clutched like a weapon. Clara avoided him entirely, retreating to the parlor with red-rimmed eyes. The air felt charged, brittle, ready to crack. By midday, Clara found Eloise in the laundry room, her voice hoarse from what had clearly been crying. She closed the door behind her with trembling hands. "I know what you saw," Clara whispered. "The journal I found. It wasn't just my mother's. It was hers during the final months. She wrote about Father's rituals, about his obsession with purification. She said he believed she had sinned and that God demanded she be cleansed." Eloise felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. "Clara, do you think your father—" "Yes," Clara said sharply, cutting her off. Tears welled again, though she fought them. "And I think he's doing the same to Thomas." Slowly, quietly, Eloise grabbed her hand. "We can't let him." Clara squeezed back, her voice shaking. "There's more. In the journal she wrote about a child, a baby, a secret father swore to bury." A knock interrupted them. The door creaked open. Silas stood in the frame, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of suspicion and righteousness that sent cold dread down Eloise's spine. "Ladies," he said softly, far too softly, "shouldn't you be tending to your duties?" Clara stepped back instinctively. Eloise lowered her gaze. Silas's eyes lingered on Eloise, searching, probing, as though looking for sin beneath her skin. "Some souls," he murmured, "invite corruption simply by existing." He turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like fading threats. Clara exhaled shakily. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows we've been looking." Eloise's heart hammered. "What do we do now?" Clara hesitated, swallowing hard. "Tonight, meet me in my mother's room. There's something else I have to show you. Something that will change everything." Eloise nodded. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been listening, watching, waiting, and that whatever waited behind the locked door at the end of the hall would not remain silent much longer. The house seemed to hold its breath as night descended. Snow pressed heavily against the windows, muting every sound except the distant groaning of branches weighed down by ice. Eloise made her way down the corridor with careful steps, her candle flickering as though resisting the dark that pooled between the walls. The door to Mrs. Davenport's room stood slightly ajar, a thin sliver of warm light slipping through the crack like a secret trying to escape. Inside, Clara waited by the vanity, the journal spread before her. The room smelled faintly of lavender and something older. Dust, memories, regret. The portrait of Mrs. Davenport above the fireplace seemed to watch them, her painted gaze soft but troubled. "You came," Clara whispered, relief and fear mingling in her voice. "I said I would," Eloise replied softly. "What is it you found?" Clara opened the journal to a page near the end. The handwriting was weaker here, lines wavering as though written by trembling hands. Eloise leaned closer. "She wrote of a baby," Clara said. "A baby born in secrecy. My father demanded the child be hidden, said it was a mark of sin, but she refused. She wrote that she felt God's mercy, not his wrath." Eloise's breath hitched as her eyes traced the faded ink. Clara turned the page. "And here she wrote of you." Eloise froze. Her own name, Eloise Hartwell, appeared in delicate script, written with aching tenderness. "My mother knew you," Clara whispered. "She cared for you when you were very small. You lived on a nearby farm. She writes that father wanted you gone, sent away after he learned the truth." Eloise felt the room tilt beneath her feet. Memories she had buried long ago, faces blurred, voices muted by time, fluttered like startled birds. "I don't understand," she whispered. Clara swallowed. "She believed you were connected to us by blood." Eloise stepped back, shaking her head, but Clara pressed on. "My parents took in families during the war. Father always insisted it was charity, but Mother wrote that one of the men, one working the fields, shared something with her. A moment of weakness, she called it. A moment of comfort in a time of grief." Silas's voice, stern and cold, echoed through Eloise's memory. "Some souls invite corruption simply by existing." Clara closed the journal gently. "You are the child, Eloise, the one father forbade her from keeping close. He sent you away because you were living proof of her disobedience and his humiliation." A sudden crash shook the house, heavy footsteps pounding down the hall. Clara's eyes widened. "He knows we're here." The door flew open. Silas stood in the threshold, face flushed with fury, Bible clutched so tightly the cover bent beneath his fingers. Snow clung to his coat, suggesting he had just come from outside, or from somewhere colder than winter. "You," he growled at Eloise, voice trembling with rage and something darker. "I knew the moment you stepped foot in this house. The same eyes, the same curse." Clara stepped forward. "Father, stop." "Silence," Silas roared. "Your mother was weak. She sinned. And this," he pointed at Eloise, shaking with a feverish conviction, "is the consequence God sent me to destroy." Eloise felt her legs tense, ready to run. But Silas advanced swiftly, the wildness in his eyes no longer human. Clara grabbed Eloise's hand. "Come on." They bolted into the hall, Silas's footsteps thundering behind them. The candle extinguished in the rush of air, plunging the corridor into darkness. Together they stumbled down the staircase, guided only by moonlight spilling faintly through the foyer windows. Silas's voice chased them. "You cannot hide what God has condemned." They reached the chapel doors. Clara shoved them open. Inside, the candles were already lit. All of them. Dozens of flames quivered, though no one had been there to light them. The air felt heavy, charged with something ancient and sorrowful. Clara froze. "Mother?" But Eloise's gaze locked on the altar. The leather-bound cross, Silas's symbol of penance, lay snapped cleanly in two. Silas stormed in after them, but at the threshold he halted abruptly, as though something invisible barred his entry. His fury twisted into terror. "No," he whispered, voice cracking. "Not again. Not tonight." Clara clutched Eloise's arm. "What is he?" But before she could finish, Silas staggered backward, pressing a hand to his chest as though gripped by an unseen force. His breath hitched, short and ragged. He stumbled into the hall, collapsing to his knees. His Bible slipped from his fingers, pages fluttering like desperate wings. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the house. Then a low rumble echoed through the floorboards, deep, almost mournful. The house seemed to inhale. And somewhere beyond the walls, something answered. Eloise stepped toward the doorway, heart pounding, knowing that the moment had arrived, the moment when every buried truth would force its way into the open. What she saw at the threshold stopped her breath short. It wasn't Silas. It was the shadow behind him. A shape she recognized without ever having seen it before. A shape that knew her, and had been waiting. If this story kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to comment what surprised you the most. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, and leave a like. Your support helps us keep bringing intense, hidden, and unforgettable stories like this one.